In with that famous verse, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, in Deuteronomy. Here, O Israel, Moses says, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. What does it mean that the Lord is one? So the classic translation of Jewish and other philosophers has been, God is one basically negates polytheism. Unlike the pagan myths where there were many gods, there is one God, one ruler, one planner, one designer, one plan behind the universe, the source of ethical monotheism. Another view discussed by Maimonides is God is one God is not a physical corporal being composite of many parts, say like the limbs of a unified body, but rather it's a transcendental oneness that is not a composite of parts. That's the traditional philosophical interpretation of God being one. However, the mystics, especially the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, and his successors, explained it in a different fashion. God is one doesn't only mean there is one God, or God himself is completely unified and not made up of diverse pieces and fragments. God is one means God is the only one. God is one means there is one reality, and that is God, and it excludes all other reality, which is somewhat of a strange interpretation and difficult to comprehend, because if I'm not mistaken, I am now standing at the podium and speaking to you, believe it or not, and I see you sitting in front of me. So how can mature, thoughtful mystics, Jews, scholars, Hasidic masters, make this what seems like a bizarre claim, that Hashem Echad, God is one, means there is only one reality, and God is that only exclusive reality, excluding all other reality? Does that mean that we believe that the world is a dream and that life is a myth and an optical illusion? But the same Torah begins with the words, God created heaven and earth. All of Judaism is based on the fact that there is an existence called the universe, humanity. You and I are players, are actors or players in that existence. What does this then mean that God is one, excluding all other reality? This will open a portal into understanding the quite fascinating Kabbalistic and Hasidic approach to understanding some of the drama of creation, some of what we mean when we talk of God, our relationship with God, the essence of Torah and of Judaism. And if I wish to put it in some words, I would say, there have been throughout history many, many approaches to life, developed among various religions, philosophers, movements. They all share a common denominator. It is interesting that most of them have seen Judaism either as an enemy or as something very strange and foreign. Is there a common denominator between all of the religions and the philosophies, including the philosophy of secularism based on Darwin's evolution and fundamental Christianity in contrast to the Jewish religion? The answer is yes. They all share a commonality, even if they seem so different from each other, in contrast to Judaism. And we'll put it in very simple terms. It's a question of something from something or something from nothing. In Hebrew, something from something is yesh mi yesh. Yesh, yesh in Hebrew means something. Yesh mi yesh means something from something. In Judaism, we have a concept called something from nothing, which we define in Hebrew as yesh me ayin. Something from nothing, or if you want to use the Latin term, it's ex nihilo, or ex nihilo, something from nothing. Now, this may seem as a completely abstract conceptualization of themes that should interest philosophers or speculators that will not have much relevance to our lives, especially not after such a heavy lunch. In August of 2013, here at the National Jewish Retreat, But in Judaism, as you know, the most abstract concepts are linked and interconnected with our concrete day-to-day reality, challenges, blessings, and issues. And the same is true with this concept of something from something versus something from nothing. Something from something is basically the model, the rational model that we all use in order to live life. We all use it, I say all, from the scientist and physicist to the businessman and housewife. From the greatest scholar delving into texts on astronomy or philosophy and geology to a simple laborer fixing a toilet bowl or a plumber, all of us employ the same rational model of something from something, which you can define as cause and effect. Every reality in our world is an effect that has an antecedent, which is a cause. That cause is an effect of yet a previous cause, which is the outcome of yet a previous cause. And so we trace back every effect to a cause and then to another cause and another cause. So when you look at a tree, we all know that that tree has an antecedent. That tree is not something from nothing. That apple tree came about from the seed of the apple tree that has been planted, which in turn is the effect of a previous tree, which is in turn the effect of a previous seed. When I look at a goldfish, I know that that goldfish did not emerge from nowhere. That goldfish was hatched from an egg. The egg also has an antecedent, which itself has a cause. When I look at a wooden home, I know there's an antecedent, and it's called lumber. And the lumber itself has a cause, which is the forest, etc., etc. I look at myself or I look at another human being. We did not emerge from nothingness. We each have a cause, an antecedent. It's called the seed and the egg of our mother and our father, which in turn have their cause and their cause all the way back to the beginning. Now you know the story, right? Okay, if you don't know, I'll tell it to you. There was a bar mitzvah boy. Who, it's one of my top 10, so listen carefully. Who comes to his mother and says, Mom, I'm preparing my bar mitzvah speech, and at the speech I want to talk about the family lineage. Where do we come from? Could you tell me about our origins? And Mom says, of course. And she begins waxing eloquent about her Baba and Zayda, about her grandmother and grandfather and great-grandparents and the prominent, prestigious lineage of this family. No, he says, Mom, all the way back, where did we begin? Oh, all the way back. Mom says, well, don't you know God created the world in 6 days? On the sixth day, he created Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve decided to have children, and the rest is history or her story. So he comes to his father. His father is an enlightened graduate of Ivy League universities. And he says, Dad, where do we come from? I want to talk at my bar mitzvah about our origin. And Dad, again, speaks about his family lineage. No, Dad, all the way back, the origin of our existence. Oh, Dad says, let me introduce you to the concept of evolution. We have evolved. Evolved from what? We have evolved from apes. His father explains to him, it took hundreds of millions of years, but we are evolution in the making. And the apes, and Dad says the apes have evolved from other primates all the way back. Dad, but how did it all begin? Dad says it all began with an explosion of bacteria. The boy comes back to his mom and says, Mom, I'm very confused. I want to give this bar mitzvah speech about where we come from. And you tell me we come from God and Adam and Eve. But Dad tells me we come from apes, monkeys, and bacteria. Who got it right? And his mother says, son, there's really no contradiction. Your father was talking about his side of the family. Where I am talking about my side of the family. Now, we live our lives based on the idea of cause and effect. There's no way you can try to heal a disease. You can try to invest in a stock market. You can try to plan a vocation. You try to create a company. You try to organize your life or your home. You try to work with a psychoanalyst to figure yourself out. If there's no cause and effect, if we don't trace back realities to the antecedents and try to predict the future. So all of our life, for it to be cohesive, organized, for it to have some sense and logic, is based on the idea that one something always comes from a precedent, from another something, which comes from another something, and the last something is always linked to the first something, even if the chain is very distant and complex. So when I look at an apple tree in its full splendor, it in no way looks like the seed rotten in the earth. But we all know that that tree, as different from its source, is ultimately an evolutionary product of that seed, even if they seem so different. Or to put it differently, I can identify the properties of the apple tree within its antecedent. I do not look today like I looked when I was in my mother's womb. Unfortunately, I'm a little larger. But we all know that when you examine microscopically the sperm and the egg, that contains within itself the properties that will later be fleshed out and fully developed in the embryo, the fetus, and ultimately the child. So yes, the link may be very distant, may be very complex, may be very multi-layered and multidimensional. But ultimately, there is a link, and every something can be traced back to a source, which is traced back to another source, and another source, and another source. What is the original source? Here, almost all philosophies and religions agree. Although the secular evolutionary scholar may completely speak of the original source in terms of natural phenomena, and the Christian theologian may call that source God, it's really a difference of semantics. They both agree that there is a something that can be identified in one form or another that gave birth to the next something, which gave birth to the next something. But they both agree that there is a something, and that something we figure out by going backwards, by extrapolating and saying, here is the product. Now let's see and examine its antecedent. Let's examine its antecedent. Back. The man believes in random evolution may say it began with the Big Bang. The religious theologian may say there is intelligent design, there is some mind who created it. We have a mind, and this being had a mind that they call God. But there's ultimately a something that is the cause of all the somethings that we encounter. Judaism has a very different perspective on existence. And it's fascinating that we Jews often are completely unaware of it. And this is what I want to address with you today and examine it. What is Judaism's perspective on existence, and see its ramifications, and then you will see that all the antagonism of all religions and philosophies to Judaism, even if they're extreme within themselves, from paganism, from Greek paganism or myth, to Christianity, from secular evolutionary biology to Buddhist or Hindu theology, there is a commonality among all of them, and Judaism is set apart. Something from nothing versus something from something. The way the Baal Shem Tov and Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi introduced this concept is by introducing the idea of perpetual creation. The Kabbalists write that creation is not a one-time event. Creation is a perpetual phenomenon, which means every single moment, God, the Creator, is recreating the world, something from nothing. So creation is not an event that occurred 5,773 years ago. but creation is occurring right now as I speak, and as I continue to speak, and as I pause, perpetually. Why? What is the meaning of this? What is the significance of this? What are the ramifications of this? So we still have to address God is one and there's no other reality, something from nothing versus something from something, and now the phenomenon of perpetual creation. And for this, I'm going to employ a metaphor. And I want you to try to pay attention to this metaphor, because it's an incomplete metaphor. I don't have a complete metaphor, but it's the best we can come up with. I think one of the better ones we can come up with. Okay. One of the greatest gifts nature or God has bestowed upon humanity, especially the Jewish people, that have allowed them to survive through endless sermons of rabbis, lectures by professors, retreats by Chabad, Hebrew school courses, is something we call daydreaming. Daydreaming is a wonderful phenomenon. In fact, probably 15% of the people sitting here right now are engaged in a daydream as I speak. I'm sorry for disturbing it at the moment. You will be able to go back to it momentarily. What is the concept of a daydream? Those of you who had the great fortune to sit in yeshiva for many years or other schools for many years, and the teacher was so boring, and instinctively, subconsciously, our daydream begins to work. And in our daydream, we travel the world for free. And we conjure lovely images. And then when the teacher says, class is over, dismissed, we come back to reality and we take on the world. Wow, what a brilliant gift. I have the great misfortune to attend many Jewish dinners. I don't know how many of you share that privilege. But I go to many, many dinners, usually, not because I like the smorgasbord, I like that too, but usually I speak at these dinners and they usually put me at the end. You know what I mean? I always say, put me up 5 o'clock, let me do my spiel and go home. I'll have my wife's dinner, it's healthier. However, they put me at the end. And you know when Jewish dinners end? They usually end at dawn. Because everyone has to talk, right? In fact, the other day I was at a dinner in Montreal. Now, the only ones who are more late than Hasidim are Syrian Sephardic Jews. They're notoriously late, notoriously. 6 o'clock means 10 o'clock. So they told me I'm going up 10 o'clock to speak. It was midnight. And I didn't speak yet. And I was supposed to give a 45-minute keynote. And there was already a 7-course meal and 9 honorees. And every honoree was supposed to speak for a minute and a half, and they ended up speaking as good Jews for 20, 25 minutes, plus video presentations, plus a choir, plus rewards, plus auction. It's 12 o'clock. I turned to the rabbi and I said, have compassion on God's creatures. Don't put up a speaker of 45 minutes. He said, you should go for an hour. I said, for what? For who? For when? Make believe I'm not here. I'm happy not to give the speech. I'm happy to go back to my hotel room. Make believe I'm not here. The dinner was nice. You made your money. Yeah? You know what they say? Whenever you go to a pharmacist, you could never read the prescription, right, of your doctor. Because what does it say? The doctor says, I made my money, you make your money, and so be it. I said, you made your money, let's call it a night. No, they came to hear you. I get up. It's 12 o'clock. You know the look on the crowd? You know the look? You know what I mean? I get up. I felt bad for myself. Even more, I felt bad for them. You know? Because they have to listen. And they were being polite. So I told them. I said, you know, there was once a dinner. Actually, there was once a dinner, and people spoke. And they went on and on and on and on. And then there was a speaker who really went on for an hour. So everybody left the room. There was one man who stayed. was one man who stayed. And the speaker saw him. He said, finally somebody appreciates my genius. So he went for another hour. It was now 1 o'clock in the morning, and the man was still there. He says, I think I have found my ultimate pupil. So he goes for another hour. He finishes 2 o'clock in the morning. He comes over to that man, and he says, Socrates had a Plato. I have been looking for my Plato all my life. I have found him. You. You will now become my beloved disciple who will transcribe all my wisdom for eternity. What do you say about my genius? The man says, to be very honest with you, I wasn't really listening. He says, you mean I spoke 3 hours to the walls? I thought I was speaking to you. He says, no, I wasn't listening. He says, so what are you doing here? He says, I'm the next speaker. So I told the crowd in Montreal, I said, I have bad news and I have good news. The bad news is I'm the next speaker. The good news is I'm the last speaker. So when I'm done, you get to go home, not before you take second portions of the Viennese table. And then I did my spiel. He wanted 45 minutes. I gave him 45 minutes. He actually wanted an hour. I gave him an hour. And it worked. They survived. I survived. And so forth. What do Jews do? It's called daydreaming. All of you have been daydreaming. I don't mean today by my lecture, but generally, especially when you come to business meetings, Oy Gewalt, board meetings, consultation meetings. You sit in waiting rooms. You sit in shul. Soon going to be Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. What would we do without the gift of daydreaming? Now, I want to perfect your skill of daydreaming. Since I've done it over many, many years, during all these dinners for many hours, I'm a little bit of an expert in the process. With daydreaming is a wonderful thing because it allows you to do anything. You can travel from here to Australia first class for free. The food is delicious, unlike plain food. It's like National Jewish Retreats catering. The movies are wonderful. You have the whole first class for yourself. It's really an amazing experience. In your daydream, you can go shopping and window shopping and actual shopping. You could buy everything and you could return it. And make all your money back, right? You know when our wives tell us, I made you a lot of money because I returned my clothes. And we all look forward and we pray, when we give the credit card, may God help that she returns everything. And it's wonderful. You can buy it, you could return it, you can keep it in your daydream. It always fits you perfectly. It always looks perfectly in the daydream. I also daydream. Sometimes, I remember many years ago when I started to speak publicly, I had an event coming up. 3,000 people would attend. I was a little anxious. And I remember a few weeks before I was walking in the street. And when you start daydreaming, you don't realize you're daydreaming. And suddenly I realized after a few minutes I was daydreaming. And what was I daydreaming? I daydreamed of me delivering the speech. And in my daydream, I saw the people. Of course, these were not real people, but I conjured up in my daydream the people. I saw the pulpit. I heard me being called up. I spoke to them. I even heard the standing ovations afterwards. I heard it in the daydream. I even saw the person in the back who didn't like me. And I managed to get upset at them in my daydream and to harbor negative emotions towards them. And then I came to my destination, I awoke from my daydream, and all was gone. In my daydream, I can go to a Giants game. If I like football, I can go to a Yankees game. If I like baseball, I could join 30,000 spectators, buy kosher hot dogs with mustard and sauerkraut, a twig of beer and Coca-Cola, together with some French fries and barbecue sauce. Sitting at the game, cheering, yay! Eating the hot dog and watching 30,000 people ecstatic at the game, all in my daydream. Think about any daydream that you have. Think about the daydream you just had a few moments ago, and you'll see you went somewhere. You spoke to somebody. You experienced an emotion. Daydreams are almost alive in our own imagination until we sober up. And now, I want to ask you a foolish question. Forgive me, okay? In Yiddish, they used to call it a klotz kasha. A klotz kasha means a question of a klotz, which is simple questions, but they're sometimes good questions. I was daydreaming, and in my daydream, I saw 3,000 people. I heard my speech. I heard the applause. I was at the Giants game, and I saw 30,000 bodies. And then, when I awoke from my daydream, they were all gone. There was not a single person. There was nothing left of the event. And my question to you is, what happened to all of them? Why, when I stopped daydreaming, are none of these realities in existence any longer? The answer, of course, is, smart rabbi, these realities never existed outside of your mind. The definition of their existence was, you were thinking of them. That is the very stuff of their existence. What does it mean that these 3,000 people exist in my daydream? They don't have an existence independent of my daydream. What it means is that in my conscious or unconscious mind, in the waves within my brain, I created an image of these 3,000 people. The definition of their existence is me thinking about them. When I stop thinking about them, they are gone. Why? Because they had no existence outside of the fact that I was thinking about them. That is the very definition of their existence. What does it mean that they exist? I was thinking about them. When I stop thinking about them, they have no existence. But let's say I'm thinking about you, sitting right here in front of me. When I stop thinking about you, will you cease to exist? Of course not. Why? Because the definition of your existence is not that I am thinking of you. The definition of your existence is that you exist outside of me. So I may be thinking of you, I may not be thinking of you. But regardless, you exist independent of me. However, the character in my dream has no existence outside of me thinking of them. They have no independent existence outside of my reality. The definition, the very material, the very stuff of their existence is what? Is my brain chemicals, is my thought. So when I stop thinking, there is no reality outside of my thought. That is the meaning of their existence. And therefore, they cease to exist. And now, I ask you this question. Our world, our entire universe, was created something from nothing. So, it's like the character in the daydream. Meaning, here we come to the crux of the issue that divides something from something to something from nothing. Something from something means that the last something has an existence because its existence can be identified within the first something. And therefore, after the first something produces the second something, even if it goes away, the second something continues to exist. For example, if you're a carpenter and you take a piece of wood and you develop it into a lovely table, into a pulpit, into a stender. You're a goldsmith and you make a candelabra. You're a silversmith and you divine a beautiful goblet of silver. Will the goblet revert back to its original form when the silversmith begins his work? When the artist finishes his or her painting and they hang it on the wall, do they perpetually have to create it? Obviously not. They create the painting, they hang it on the wall, and they're gone. I create a vessel, a piece of furniture, a home, a design, a piece of clothing. Even when I finish my work, it still exists. Why? Because what did I do? I didn't create something new, something from nothing. I created something from something. I developed one something from another something. Because I just developed and actualized something that was there in potential, even after I am gone, the second something still exists because it has a reality outside of me. I just developed what is. I took the tree and I took the lumber and I developed it into a bookcase. But I didn't create something new, something from nothing. It was something from something. The bookcase existed in potential within the lumber, within the forest. I just had to actualize and develop its potential. So once I developed that potential, even if the carpenter is gone, the builder is gone, the product still remains intact because the product exists independently. But what about the characters in my daydream? I have to perpetually create them. What do I have to do for the characters in the daydream to cease to exist? What do I have to do? Stop thinking. I don't have to kill them. I don't have to shoot them. I don't have to burn them. I just have to stop thinking. Because the only way they can exist is if I perpetually conjure them up in my brain. Why? Because it's something from nothing. They don't have a substance independent of me. Their entire substance is nothing but me thinking of their reality. So if I perpetually create them, they're there. If I cease to create them, they go back to what they always were and are. Nothingness, where the piece of lumber exists independent of the carpenter. The carpenter merely developed the lumber into a bookcase. He created something from something, but the something was there independent. So even when he or she takes their hands off the product, it remains. The daydreamer, on the other hand, created something from nothing, something that has no substance outside of me creating it. Something whose entire existence is the fact that I am thinking of it. It's something from nothing, and therefore as long as I think them, they are. The moment I cease, they're gone. Now I ask you this question. Our entire universe, is it something from something or something from nothing? Comes the Torah and says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. The word bara, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Creation. Nachmanides Ramban writes, when it says the word create, it's not like formation. In Hebrew, there are two words, Bria and Yitzira. Bria is creation. Yitzira is formation. Everything in our world is formation, something from something. The seed is formed into a fetus. The egg is hatched into the chicken. The dollar morphs into hopefully $100, etc. Creation of the universe is something from nothing. What do I mean is something from nothing? There was no something that God worked with. There was no pre-existing material which God used like a carpenter or an artist who has a canvas and pigment and a quill and uses these materials to create a painting. The entire universe is something from nothing. God willed there to be a world, and as a result of that, there is a universe. Which brings me to this question. What does God have to do in order for our world to cease to exist? What does God have to do if He wants our world to cease to exist? One word, nothing. He has to do nothing. Just like the character in the daydream. What do you have to do so that that character in your daydream should not exist? Nothing. Stop thinking about it. Because that character has no identity outside of you thinking about it. So what does God have to do for the world to cease to exist? stop thinking, stop creating it. He has to basically do nothing. Because when he does nothing, the world reverts to what it is. What is it? Nothingness. It's just God creates it every moment, and that's why there is perpetual creation. Just like with your daydream. If you stop for a moment daydreaming, they're gone. You have to continuously create it because it has no substance outside of you. The universe has no existence outside of its creator. It's something from nothing, not something from something. So therefore, God has to perpetually create existence moment after moment after moment after moment. So Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. The Torah says, God thinks, therefore I am. God thinks, therefore I am. In fact, the definition of my I is what? God actively thinking. However, there is a big difference between the metaphor of the daydream and the idea of creation. What's the difference? Two differences. One is the characters in the daydream don't have a tangible reality. I can't really punch them in the face. I mean, I can punch my brain, which won't be too wise. Our existence has a tangible reality, what we call physicality. There's also another difference. The characters in the daydream don't have free choice. They are complete products of my imagination. They don't have the delusion of independence, where we can walk around our entire lives and it should never even occur to us that everything is nothing but godly energy. And that is why the Bible doesn't say God thought and there was light. God thought and there were animals. God thought and there was man. What does the Bible say? God spoke. What's the difference between thought and speech? Thought is intimate. Speech is projective. You don't know my thoughts. My thoughts can never be distorted in your mind because you don't know what I'm thinking. Thought is always within me. Thought remains within my space, like my daydreams. I don't know what you're daydreaming. I just know that you are daydreaming over there in the back. But what you're daydreaming beats me. I hope it's something interesting. When I speak, you hear what I'm saying. You can interpret my words. In fact, and let me tell this to you, it's something good to know. What most speakers say and what people hear is not the same thing. I have often asked people, what did you hear me say? I'm happy if it's something new and not opposite. Usually it's opposite of what I wanted to say. Especially when you tell a story. Especially with Jewish crowds. Because I told you earlier, they don't listen. They right away develop opinions, so it's very hard for them to retain it. So speaking can be distorted. In fact, you can take my words and use them against me. You can distort my words, misinterpret them, misunderstand them, misconstrue them. It happens constantly. You remember the telephone game we used to play? That's exactly what happens. That's why creation is not God's thought. That's why creation is God's speech. Because if it would be God's thought, there would be no room for distortion. I would look at me and I would look at you, and what would I see when I see you? I would see, what would I see in you? Godliness. God's thoughts. That's what I am. That's what you are, which would make us one. But now I look at myself, I look at you. I have an ego. You have an ego. At least I have an ego. Some of you may also have an ego. Ego, as I told you, is easing God out. And hence, there's you and there's me. Why is Shabbat holy? I want you to understand this. So next Shabbat will be different. What do we say in the Bible? God worked for 6 days, and what happened on the seventh day? He rested. Really, God worked really, really hard, but he lifted weights. He lifted 350 pounds for 6 days. Isn't God God? Isn't God good at what he does? Was God really exhausted? It's like, whoa, I have to turn off my cell phone. It was a hard week. What do you mean God rested? What type of God is he if he has to rest? My dear friends, it means something much more deep, much more sophisticated. For 6 days, God speaks the world. On Shabbat, God thinks the world. The world is elevated from a product of speech to a product of thought. And because the world is godliness, so when God thinks the world is now absorbed in his presence. So the whole world becomes a holier place. So even the food that we eat and the nap that we take and the conversations we have a quality of holiness to them. So when you light the candles Friday afternoon, what I want you to meditate and imagine is, for the feminine souls among us, namely at this moment, you're welcoming the world from a product of speech into a product of thought. Now the world is not anymore God speaking it, the world is God thinking it. So he ceases to work, meaning it's not a thing of speech, it's a thing of thought. So you remember in camp, you ever had a counselor who would tell you these scary good night stories, right? Okay, so I was a counselor for quite a few years and I had to entertain my kids, right? So 9:30 at night, and I don't have a story to tell them. So what do? 300 years ago, there lived a man in a forest. And I make up the story as I'm going, right? But imagine my words can actually create those realities. That's what creation is. Every moment God thinks, therefore I am. God speaks, therefore I am. So what is the I of I? Who am I? If you can unravel me, if you can remove all my layers, what is the I of I? If you can get to the core of the character in the daydream, what will you find? Me, my thought, my energy, my mind. The I of the I is divine energy. So now when we say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one," and the Baal Shem Tov says, God is the only reality, what does that mean? The answer is very simple. If you're daydreaming that you are by a Giants game, okay? Come back to the Giants now. And there's 30,000 people in the, 30,000 people in the stadium, right? I want to ask you, do you feel less lonely because there's 30,000 people with you? Are you now 30,000 people instead of one? Why not? Because all these 30,000 people are what? It's your thought. It's your energy. It's you. They say, what's the definition of chutzpah? You go to the therapist because you have a split personality and you want a group discount. So when you say, there's God and there's me. No, we have to get rid of that. The Baal Shem Tov got rid of that. There's no God and me. The I of I is God. The reality of reality is God. Now come back to Torah. And this is an important paradigm shift. And I want you to understand this was probably the essence of the Hasidic revolution of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings. Okay? Open up a Bible anywhere. It's not a fun book to read. Trust me. I've been reading it all my life. I've been teaching it all my life. Especially when you come to these portions, okay? God commands you to do so and so. If you follow the commandment, you'll be blessed. If you disobey His commandment, you'll be cursed. God wants you to obey His commandments. All He asks of you is obey His will, and then it'll be good. And if not, you're going to suffer. Let me give you the translation, okay? This word God is a very problematic word. Listen to this. I'm doing the same verses, okay? The essence of your reality dictates that if you live a life in accordance with your own core, it will be blessed. If you live a life of dissonance in which you're alienated from your own core, it could never feel good. It could never work. If I'm eating foods, I have a diabetic history in my family. So that's why these retreats are lethal for me. So I stay away from the cheesecake, right? But I love cheesecake. That's a fact. So I say, I love cheesecake, I'll eat it. Yes, but 30 minutes later, I'm in a bad mood. Because I ate something that was at odds with the composition of my physiological self. But just like I have a physiological self, I have on a deeper level the core of myself, that is divine energy. So when the Torah says, do this, don't do this, what the Torah is really saying is, by doing this, you will be in touch with your reality, which is God. Because God is you and you are God. The I of I is God. In fact, God is not a right term. God is sounds like there's God, and God is great, God is smart, God is kind, God is tough, God. No! Isness is God. You got that? Isness, I-S-N-E-S-S. Reality is God. We exist in reality. We are reality. We are part of God. The term God is a very confusing term. It sounds like an existence outside of ourselves, which is why monotheism often breeds atheism. Nietzsche said, if God exists, I would like to be God. Why does he have all the power? The answer is God doesn't exist. God is existence. There is no existence outside of God, even if there is God outside of existence. So when there's a mitzvah, it's not a commandment. A mitzvah is not a commandment. That's a very primitive translation, even if a very popular one, and on some level true. The definition of a mitzvah is what? Is a way to create alignment between you and you. A mitzvah is the ability to relieve ourselves of the burden of spiritual schizophrenia. A mitzvah, Torah life, means the opportunity to relieve ourselves of the burden of making believe we exist. That's a terrible burden. Which is why to live a Jewish life always means to relax and to live in the moment. Because to live with God means to live in the moment. Because right now, you and I are being created. So when I live in the past or I live in the future, I'm not living with reality. To live with reality means to live in the moment. It also means stop worrying so much. Don't be so anxious. Don't figure out everything in your life forever. Because it's being created every single moment, something from nothing. Imagine somebody gives you a lift and you're holding a suitcase and you hold on to the suitcase and they say, why don't you put down your suitcase? They say, no, it's enough that you're taking me. I don't want to bother you to take my suitcase too. And you tell them, you chacham, you klutz, you're in a car. It doesn't make a difference to me if I carry you and I carry your suitcase. We sometimes live life and we say, oh, you have all these burdens. What's going to be? What's going to be? What's going to be? And we carry these burdens on our shoulders like a washing machine on our shoulders. And God turns to you and says, I don't understand you. I am creating you right now every single moment. How do you think you're breathing? How do you think you're walking? How do you think you're inhaling and exhaling? How do you think your heart is beating? I am right now thinking and speaking that you should exist. So you think I can't deal with your suitcase? Just let go. Give me a suitcase. I'm creating your whole entity something from nothing. From nothing. Literally from nothing. Which means that there is another very powerful consequence to this idea. Namely, how significant is the food I eat? How significant is a word I say? Compare one word that you say or one piece of food that you eat to the largest galaxy in our universe. And you say, this is insignificant. You remember when Ilan Ramon went outer space and they asked him what Earth looks like? They interviewed him. I remember I heard the interview. Unfortunately, he never made it back. And he said, such a little planet, what's all this fighting? Our planet, our Earth, is like a marble. We are like specks of dust. How can you give that significance relative to the galaxies? Hence the Greeks. And the same is true many philosophers today. Human existence can't be that meaningful. But from a Jewish perspective, 1 second, the galaxy doesn't really exist, and I don't really exist. We're nothing. We both exist. Why? Because God wants me to exist, and He wants the galaxy to exist. So from His perspective, we both have the same value and the same significance. And that's why in Judaism, we give equal value to a single act, thought, speech of a person, like we give to the largest planet. But how can you compare? I'm a little mortal nothing today. I'm here. I don't know what's going to be tomorrow. The answer is, if I'm looking from my own perspective, then everything is nothing. Then the largest galaxy is as nothing as I am. Then the whole universe is nothing. It's all something from nothing. If I'm looking from God's perspective, the fact that anything exists is because God wanted you to exist at this moment right now. And that means it has infinite value and infinite significance. And it means I'm never a victim of the past. I can always recreate myself because creation is happening right now. So, you have to tune into the beat. You got to dance to the music. Live in the present. When you live in the present, you recreate yourself every moment. Every moment has infinite value. Every moment has infinite significance. So finally, in conclusion, how many of you have read Kurt Vonnegut, Breakfast of Champions? He has one scene there, and this scene I want to close with, and I want you to think about. Kurt Vonnegut was a Jew and a strange fellow. Okay, like many of us. In the Breakfast of Champions, he has a novel, but it's not a regular novel. It's a novel about a novel, right? He came up with an idea. He doesn't tell a story. He tells a story about a novel. So there's this guy in the novel about the novel who's sitting in a bar, drinking, minding his own business, very relaxed. Suddenly he hears footsteps and he starts sweating. As the footsteps increase, his sweat increases. Look at me. And then this person whose footsteps he heard makes an entrance into the bar. And the man sitting minding his own business vanishes into nothingness. He ceases to exist. And Kurt Vonnegut asks the question, who walked into the bar? Anybody? The author. The author walked into the bar. In other words, remember, this is a novel about a novel. So the character in the novel is minding his own business and enjoying himself and feeling good about himself. Then he hears footsteps, he starts sweating. When the author walks in, he realizes that he has no reality outside of the stroke of the pen of the author. So imagine you're writing a novel, and with the stroke of the pen, you're creating characters. You're giving them imagination, you're giving them emotion, you're giving them physical features, but they have no existence outside of your stroke of the pen. But they don't have a consciousness. Imagine you would be able to give your characters in your novel consciousness, and they would actually think they are independent. And then one day you show up. Well, my dear holy friends, this happens to each and every one of us at some point in our life. Sometimes when we're 10, sometimes when we're 20, sometimes when we're 30, sometimes it happens a few moments before the end. The author of the novel walks into our consciousness, and we realize that we constitute a stroke of the pen of the author. When I make peace with that, I become both nothing and infinite at the same time. Thank you very much.
If you like that video, hit the subscribe button and notification bell below for hours of the best Jewish content online.